Out of all of the characters from HBO's Game of Thrones, a compelling case could be made that King Euron Greyjoy has changed the most from his literary counterpart. Even George Martin seems to think so. Martin has remained notedly silent on the ending of Game of Thrones and how terrible it is, but he does specifically mention in a blog post from 2022 that Euron Greyjoy on HBO is way different from his Euron Greyjoy. This is because TV Euron is just kind of a bumbling buffoon who's into Cersei and little else, whereas Book Euron is this eldritch lord who has claimed the Seastone chair and soon aims to claim the Iron Throne of all Westeros through using whatever magic he can get his hands on. And that magic is the focus of today's video. Euron is someone who very much projects the image of a person who is adept in all of these dark arts and sorceries, but it's unclear how much of that is bluster and how much of it is real. It's clear that a lot of it is real, and today I'm going to go into each of the elements of his potential magical nature and discuss what exactly they might mean for the entirety of the story and what exactly they might mean for Euron's past and present. Specifically, whether or not he's a green seer, whether or not he's a Skinchanger, whether or not he has prophetic visions, and whether or not he is a failed student of Bloodraven. Before delving into Euron's supposed magic, I thought it would be useful to discuss the instances where he does seem to have some sort of prescient knowledge of either events that are to come in the future or events that have already happened that he has no way of knowing about. The first of these is a massive red flag that stuck out to me on first read, but it's pretty innocuous. "Save me from the crabs in my belly." This is a line that Euron says in passing during his godly man speech, or godless man speech, which is one of the best in the series. But this is a very interesting, very specific call out here. Saving someone from the crabs in their belly, not something that usually happens. The crab feeder is not around in the main series, but there is one character who is very specifically dying of crabs in his belly, supposedly. That being Lord Hoster Tully, grandsire to the Stark children and father of Catelyn Stark. He probably has stomach cancer, as that is typically what crabs are referred to as in terms of like having a disease, other than like STD crabs, but I don't think that Hoster is dying of that. I think that Euron seems to be displaying knowledge of this very specific person's death, and it's unclear where exactly he might have gotten that knowledge. It's also worth noting that if Hoster is dying of this, it could conceivably be another character dying of belly crabs, but this is very specific, and it's the only time in the series where belly crabs are mentioned other than Hoster. Continuing this list of things that people supposedly pray for is "make the maiden love me." It's an incredibly common sentiment, especially in A Song of Ice and Fire, but it brings to mind the prologue of the book in which it appears. In A Feast for Crows, the first chapter deals with Pate, this novice at the Citadel who is motivated to steal from the Maesters by his desire for the maiden Rosie. He's later killed by a faceless man, and many theorize that Euron employed the same group, or maybe in the same individual, to kill his brother and King Balon. This could be displaying knowledge from some prophetic source, or it could just be passing along information from the faceless man he had previously employed. Though I think that maybe the former is more likely than the latter, given the fact that there is this kind of code of secrecy with the faceless men, as we learn from Arya's chapters. I don't think they're the type to share knowledge between kills, and this could just be a very general sentiment that Martin means to echo back to the prologue. There's one more element from this speech I want to discuss. Like the last one, it could be applied to a wide number of characters, realistically thousands of people in the world of Ice and Fire, but there are a few specific characters in the series that I think it could be referencing. That being Cure My Withered Leg. There are a number of characters who come to mind with specifically one messed up leg. The ones, in my mind at least, are Willis Tyrell and Ned Stark, neither of which is really described as withered, and neither of which could realistically be cured by a maester, hence them seeking out a prayer to the gods. We also have Bran with his paralysis and Duran with his gout. But in these two instances, both legs, plural, are affected. And in Duran's case, gout causes the joints to swell rather than be diminished or withered. Since Euron is supposedly rattling off prayers to gods, if I had to say this is coming from one specific individual who we know, it'd probably be Willis Tyrell. The injury was long ago, so it stands to reason that the muscles in his leg could have withered away because of it. I think this being unlikely could explain it being a prayer, in addition to Willis being fairly devout from what we've heard. The first thing I'd like to discuss is Euron's supposed all-seeing eye. Euron has an eye patch. He has this smiling eye, which is the eye that is shown to the world, and the blood eye, which is supposedly this very dark and potentially magical element. It's unclear as to what exactly this might do, but Euron does seem to have some elements of knowledge that he shouldn't have. There are things happening in the world that are very isolated that Euron somehow seems to know and list in this massive speech he gives prior to the King's Moot. So I'll go through each of those in turn here. Despite the power and fear that the Blood Eye seems to hold in the minds of all of the other Greyjoys, specifically Aeron and Theon, who both think of it with terror, I don't know if that is the source of Euron's prophetic visions. Rather, we have another source shown to us both in A Feast for Crows and in the Forsaken sample chapter of The Winds of Winter, that being a shade of the evening. This is a hallucinogenic drug that, when consumed, causes these visions that sometimes show the future, sometimes show the present, and I believe that that is why Euron knows all of these things. I think that he's very much trying to present himself as this godly man. This individual has been chosen by supernatural power to ascend the throne, but in this instance, he is gleaning knowledge from this magical substance rather than anything beyond the veil. This is directly reflected in the main chapter in the series so far, at least that's been officially published, that is dealing with Shade of the Evening, that being Daenerys for Clash of Kings, the House of the Undying. Daenerys is fed this same hallucinogenic substance and then wanders from room to room in these warlocks' abode, viewing events from the past, present, and future. She sees parts of the War of the Five Kings that have happened or will happen. She sees her brother Rhaegar in the past before she was even born, and she sees the future at points. She sees the Red Wedding before it happens, and she sees elements of her own future and things that didn't end up happening, most notably her son Rhaego becoming the stallion that mounts the world. I think that Euron is using this drug in order to present himself in a way that very much fits this kingly image that he's created. I think it's a smart thing to do. I think that he is using this substance in a way that other individuals really haven't, other than maybe the warlocks. Maybe he's taking a page out of their book. But I think that rather than having any divine influence, Euron is kind of just tripping balls all the time. I have to ask, what do you think of Euron and his magic? Do you think he's a fraud? Do you think there's more there than I'm discussing in this video? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. While you're down there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It helps me, helps the video, helps the channel, and I really appreciate it. While I don't think there's any divine influence going on with Euron, there could be elements of some other influence that people have very much debated for many years. Specifically, this idea comes from two key passages from the Reaver chapter, which is the chapter immediately chronologically after the King's Moot. To quote from that chapter in Feast for Crows, "When I was a boy, I dreamt that I could fly, but when I woke, I couldn't, or so the maester said. But what if he lied?" And the second quote, "Perhaps we can all fly. How can we know unless we leap from some tall tower?" Both of these obviously bring to mind Bran's visions early on in the Game of Thrones. In fact, that exchange with the Maester very much sounds like Bran's own exchange after waking up with Maester Luwin, as Bran asks if he can fly and asks about these visions he's been having in dreams, only to have it be dismissed by the Maester. This brings to mind the idea, was Euron at some point tutored by Bloodraven? Was this the kind of genesis of Euron's focus on magic and potential evil? In that Bran chapter, I think it's Bran 3, A Game of Thrones, where he's having this vision in his coma, he notes the bodies and bones of many dead dreamers below him. The thought being that maybe Euron could be one of those bodies. With that said, Euron is not dead, and his gifts really do not seem to be dead. And there are some issues with the idea that Bloodraven, or the Three-Eyed Raven, whoever this is the person who is influencing Euron as a student. Specifically, given the fact that some people think that there is no such thing as a three-eyed crow in relation to Bloodraven, that Bran could be sending himself these visions, and that he's just giving these visions to other versions of himself, and that's what these bones are, essentially. Check out the time-traveling Bran theory by Preston Jacobs. It's very fun, it's very good. And additionally, even if it is Bloodraven, if it isn't time-traveling Bran, this doesn't really track with the idea that Bran is just this person who's destined to take up this mantle as this supernatural greenseer and save the world from the long night. It makes sense that Bloodraven might explore other people, but I feel like he wouldn't do it unless they were a sure thing. And the fact that Euron ended up so badly does very much contradict this idea of Bloodraven as an all-powerful, all-knowing entity. There's an angle on this that I think clears up any doubts about these two characters and very much explains why Euron is the way he is. I think whoever Euron's psychic muse was, be it Bloodraven, be it Future Bran, be it, I don't know, Quaithe, somebody else, who knows. Whoever it was, I think they intentionally failed Euron. Euron is lining up to be an incredibly important character in The Winds of Winter and in A Dream of Spring. Martin has said that much and really wants to draw attention to the fact that Euron in the books is way different and way more magical than the guy who appeared on the show. With that said, I think that Euron could be a necessary evil. Such things are a big focus in Martin's plots revolving around prophecy and characters trying to control the destiny of the Seven Kingdoms. We get a lot of that with Bloodraven and the actions he's taken in the past. And I think that Euron could be essential in getting the Seven Kingdoms to the point at which Bran will need to save them, or could be essential in just the courses of the wars to come. We also need to discuss whether or not Euron has the power to skin change, or warg. These gifts are very geographically isolated. As far as I'm aware, the only individuals who can skin change are either from the north, or maybe there's one or two from the Riverlands, but there's also some in the Iron Islands. The far-off island of Lonely Light is home to the Farwinds, this noble house that is said to skin change into seals and the like to just go around their islands. So such things are possible on the Iron Islands, but what makes me think that Euron is a warg and has these gifts? It all revolves around Euron's relationship with Valyria. For those who don't know, Valyria was this ancient civilization, this Rome analog who's very magical, the creators of dragons, who fell about 400 or 500 years prior to the series. Where that city is now is a smoking ruin that is said to be cursed, from which no individuals ever come back. Individuals have sailed there, including a descendant, or ancestor rather, of Tyrion Lannister, and they just never return. In A Feast for Crows, Euron repeatedly claims to have sailed the Smoking Sea and visited Valyria and returned alive, which would make him the only person in living memory to do so, other than maybe Arya Targaryen, and she didn't go great afterwards. So this is a very interesting claim, and Euron seems to back it up with the items he produces. He has this banded dragon horn with Valyrian glyphs that he claims to be able to use to control dragons. And he also has a full suit of Valyrian steel armor, the likes of which really hasn't been seen since the Doom. With that said, he's still kind of weird and touchy about the idea of having seen Valyria. He mentions it in the Reaver chapter, and Roderick the Reader specifically calls this out. He asks, "Have you?" very quietly, and Euron kind of flips shit on him a little bit. It's suspicious, and it makes it seem like Euron maybe hasn't gone to Valyria, but he does have these objects. What gives? How did he get them? Euron's ship, the Silence, is crewed by mutes. I don't know very much about sailing outside of what I taught myself for a nautical Dungeons and Dragons game several years ago, but it's very important to be able to communicate within a ship's crew. Signals need to be given, you need to know which flags to raise, which sails to raise, what exactly to do, where to steer, and doing all of this while completely silent seems near impossible. It's also worth noting that these are all thralls, they very likely cannot read, and we see no evidence that they're inventing like sign language or anything like that, or any sort of like code or tapping or what have you. Rather, it seems as though Euron might have another way of communicating with his crew, that being psychically, entering their minds and controlling them. I doubt he'd be able to do that to all of them at once, as that would be a level of skill that even Varamir Sixskins couldn't muster, and I don't think that Euron would be that gifted of a skin changer. But I think that this potential skin changing of his crew ties into his potential exploration of Valyria. Martin has directly said that Euron has been to Valyria. I think that Euron has sailed there, but I don't think the man himself has actually stepped foot on the continent. Rather, my thought is that Euron is using his crew of mutes and warging them into Valyria to locate and retrieve magical artifacts, the likes of which have not been seen since the fall of this ancient empire. Then it's sort of the world's deadliest and worst relay race to retrieve them. I imagine that once an individual dies, he just sends in another warged to retrieve any artifacts, one by one, until he eventually has a dragon horn and a full suit of Valyrian steel armor. This would satisfy both Victarion doubting that Euron has gone to Valyria, and Roderick the Reader doing the same, in that actually working as something that gets Euron's goat, but also the fact that he has still been there. It sort of fills both boxes in a way that I think could very much work for Euron and for the series with the level of magic it currently has. Euron Greyjoy is one of the most uniquely magical characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, and he is set up to be one of the most important villains going into the Winds of Winter. It's unclear exactly what he's going to do next. In the past, I've speculated that he could beeline for the Iron Throne. He could end up getting a dragon in the near future if Dragonbinder ends up creating this bond between him and one of Daenerys' dragons rather than Victarion and one of Daenerys' dragons, though, I mean, we all want to see Victarion ride a dragon. Overall, I think that Euron is a massive question mark, and a lot of these magical elements will remain a mystery until and maybe even through the Winds of Winter. But I do think that whoever taught Euron this little bit of magic initially did so with the intentional purpose that Euron was going to be a villainous force that would force Westeros in the direction that they wanted. And additionally, I think that Euron is using his skin-changing abilities that might have been the thing that signaled his presence to Bloodraven or Bran or whoever to kind of use thralls to retrieve artifacts from Valyria. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it, and it does really help grow the channel. I'll have many more videos for you in the near future. This is my first of 2025, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'll have a ton on A Song of Ice and Fire, Dunk and Egg, House of the Dragon, what have you, Game of Thrones, maybe even if I feel like talking about something bad. But thank you again for watching, and I will see you all in the near future. Goodbye, everyone.